Doing well. I just want to clarify something. Yesterday, we had a quote in the Gemara about tit on Yud Testament base 19b, 19b1, about muddy water that could be joined in to make a mikvah, of 40 sa, to make a mikvah of 40 sa, which is the minimum size of a mikvah. The question was raised, there is a law that you can't pour water into mikvah to make a mikvah a kosher mikvah. That's called mayim shuvim, water that was poured. The water has to naturally collect by itself. You make a hole in the ground, and the rain goes into the pit. You can't make a hole in the ground and then go to a well or collect water in a pail and then put into the mikveh. That doesn't work. Once you have a kosher mikveh, then you could go ahead and add water to the mikveh. Because then we say each water that you add becomes nullified by the previous kosher mikveh. But to create a mikveh, you have to make sure that you have first 40 sa of water that none of the water was poured in by a person, collected naturally. So the question here is, they had this case of this muddy water that we said could be joined in to make a mikveh kosher. So what's the case of this muddy water joining into the mikveh? So I looked up that even if the prohibition of taking water and adding the water, throwing the water into the mikveh to make a kosher mikveh is only by something which is water. So, but not so certain other forms that is not water would not be a problem, and therefore it only applies to clear water, not to mud. So therefore, you could even actually pour this muddy water into this pool of water. Let's say you have clear water and you want to pour in some muddy water. If the whole mikveh is made out of muddy water, then you will not be able to use that as a mikveh if the whole thing is made out of muddy water. But if the whole thing is not made out of muddy water, then you're able to use muddy water and actually pour muddy water into the mikveh, because that's not considered. It's not water. It's not actual water, and therefore that's the allowance for that. I just wanted to just clarify that that's a unique point about the muddy water. Okay. The other part yesterday, we had a question that Dr. Navid spoke about regarding Tosfot. Good morning, Max. Maybe we'll wait for Dr. Navid to come in, if he's able to come today, to discuss his issue that he brought up. What did he say? That he was talking also about the Gemara using the case of the mikveh of the muddy water as a example to a case of a sukkah. Because we said by a sukkah, we said that we have this phenomenon that if you have a small sukkah the size, let's say, of 7 tvachim, the height of the sukkah is 10 tvachim, the area is 7 tvachim by 7 tvachim, and you don't have schach covering the whole area of the sukkah. You left a certain space, and insignificant. I mean, you might think it's insignificant, but in a certain sense, it's less than 3 tvachim, a space which is less than 9 to 12 inches, which we have a rule of lavud. When you have a space that's very small, we consider that space sealed, as if it's covered. And therefore, the sukkah is a kosher sukkah. But even though the sukkah is kosher, so imagine, make believe this room would be a small, very small room, and you have schach on the ceiling, but the schach didn't cover the whole. There was a space, let's say, running across the sukkah. There was a space, but the space was not so wide. The space was, let's say, like this. Okay, less than 9 inches, right? I had such a space. So the Gemara says, if you have such a space, if I have a space running across the sukkah, if it's less than 3 tvachim, we look at the space as if it's closed, as if the schach continued, even though it didn't continue. We look at it as if it sealed it, right, Adam? But you still can't sit underneath this empty space, even though the empty space is used to create the size of the sukkah, because you need a 7 by 7 sukkah, and you consider the space as if it's covered with schach, but nevertheless, you can't sit under that space. I can't sit under this empty space running from one end of the sukkah to the other, even though it's less than 3 tvachim. And you told me that space, since it's less than 3 tvachim, could be considered as if it's sealed, and it's a cover of a sukkah. It could help create the measurements that you have a sukkah, but nevertheless, I can't sit under it. So it joins to create the sukkah, to make the sukkah, but yet it still invalidates me to use it. So the Gemara that's a very interesting. Where do we find such a thing? If you're telling me you could be used that empty space as sukkah, it could be used to create. I'm talking about a small minimum size sukkah. We need this space to make it sukkah, exactly. We're talking about a minimal small sukkah. So where do we find that now I can't sit under that space? If it's good enough to create the sukkah, so it should have the status of a sukkah that I should be able to sit underneath it. So the Gemara says we found this phenomenon when it came to a mikveh. What was the phenomenon by a mikveh? That you have a certain substance, you have this muddy water, which could be used to, I have, let's say, a pool of water. Morning, Simon, I need 40 subs. It's a certain measurement. I need 40 sub of water to collect in this pit in order for it, of rainwater, let's say, for it to be a kosher mikvah. I got 38. Morning, Aaron. I got 38 saw of rainwater. I'm allowed to take 2 saw of muddy water. It depends exactly how muddy it could be, but 2 saw of muddy water and pour it in, and now I got 40. It creates the size of the mikvah. It makes the mikvah 40, but yet I can't dip in a mikvah that's a muddy mikvah. So if I can't dip in a muddy mikvah, so we find this phenomenon that you have an item that could create a mikvah, help create a mikvah, the muddy water, but yet I can't dip in, I can't go take if I have a 40 saw of muddy water, I can't go into that type of mikvah. If I have a different 40 saw of mikvah, I can't go ahead and want a 40 saw of muddy water mikvah. I can't dip into that. So we find the phenomenon that you have a situation, it could be used to create a mikvah, it could be joined in, those 2 muddy water could join in to create a mikvah 40, but yet you can't dip into the mikvah of muddy water if you have a muddy water mikvah. So we find this phenomenon. It can be used to join the mikvah, the muddy water, but yet you can't dip in a muddy water mikvah. So the Gemara is comparing that precedent to the empty space of a sukkah. The empty space of a sukkah could create the sukkah if it's less than 3 tvachim. Same principle, but you can't sit under the spot which is empty. So the Tosfos, Dr. David and Adam saying, but how it doesn't seem to be a good comparison, because the muddy water, you're just showing me when it's a totally muddy water mikvah, you can't dip in a totally muddy water. The same way if you have a empty sukkah, totally empty space with no schach. If you have a sukkah with no space, everything is empty, you also can't sit in such a sukkah. But where do you find while it's being used to make the sukkah kosher, that you can't sit in that spot? The muddy water, when it's in the mikvah and it creates the 40, it adds and it creates the 40 sukkah, you could dip in while you're in that. Well, you could dip into that. So maybe the same way you could dip into that 40 sukkah mikvah, which part of it had muddy water, and Rashi understands that you should be able to dip into any part of that mikvah. So if that's the case, you should be able to sit into any part of the sukkah that has this empty space that's less than 3 tefachim, because it made the sukkah a sukkah. The muddy water adds to the mikveh. You added 2 saw of muddy water, right, Max? Now you got 40, and you can dip in that mikveh. We don't say you can only dip in the non-muddy part now. You could say you could dip into the mikveh. So too, you should be able to say that when you have less than 3 tvachim empty space, you should be able to say if it creates the sukkah, if it's considered making the sukkah, you should be able to sit underneath that spot. That is Tosfos' question. How do you compare? Is that what you were asking, Adam? Is that what you were asking? You asked something other thing. How do you? There's no. It's not. Doesn't seem to be a good. If you want to say I have a precedent, it has to be a good match. But if it's not such a great match, you can't say that, to prove from there. That's Tosfos' answer. Exactly. So Tosfos says that the comparison is because even if we say that the muddy water you can add to the mikvah to create it a 40 saw mikvah, but in that area of the mikvah, let's say it's muddy, and the muddy water goes down on the bottom, whatever that spot you can't, that area of the mikvah which is muddy, we have to understand how much, but that area of mikvah which is muddy, you would not be able to dip. You would only be able to dip into the area of the mikvah which is not muddy. So that's what Tosfos said. Then it's a great comparison. The muddy part of the mikvah creates the mikvah, the muddy water, but yet you can't dip into that spot. That's a great match. Same thing. The collective body, but you still can't, but that specific area. Right. And that's exactly like the airspace in a sukkah. If it's less than 3 tvachim, it makes it a kosher sukkah, because less than 3 tvachim is considered sealed. But that area, you can't go in. You can't sit under. That's Tosfos' approach.
Near the shore, it's hazy, maybe there's like stuff in it, like sediments, mud, clay, whatever, and it's kind of suspended. But as you get away from deeper and deeper, you see that the water is clear because it's further away from the
Okay, very good. But here we're talking about you're making them. You're making it. You're making the mikvah. Right. Okay, so that answers Dr. David's question. So that's but again, just for halacha, we're soon going to be, this week is Rosh Chodesh, next week is Rosh Chodesh Elul. Thursday, Friday, Wednesday night is Rosh Chodesh Elul. So before you know it, Sukkah is around the corner. So you make sure that there shouldn't be gaps. There shouldn't be this empty space in your Sukkah. Even if the empty space is less than 3 tvachim, as we saw, if let's say this is a Sukkah, and they have an empty space, there's no schach in a certain spot of the sukkah. If it goes from one end of the sukkah to the other end of the sukkah, even if it's less than 3 tvachim, even if it's less than 9 inches, you should not be sitting under that spot. That spot that there is no schach. If that spot goes from one end of the sukkah to the other end of the sukkah. So let's say I have a few inches. There's no schach, but it goes all the way. But that the Shulchan Aruch says I can't sit under that spot. So the best way to do it, as we said, is to, but it's part of the total. It can't even be used to join, make the sukkah kosher sukkah, but we can't sit under that spot. So how do we ensure that we don't have that problem? So one way is if we crisscross the schach. That means if I have schach going this way, and at any part of the sukkah, part of the sukkah, I crisscross. If I crisscross the schach in any way, I have one line of schach going the other way. Then I've created that there's never going to be this space going from one end of the sukkah to the other end of the sukkah. So that's one way to ensure that it's not a problem. Right.
So. I don't know.
Bamboo material, whatever material you say.
Usually.
If as long as it's kosher, it should break. That will break somehow. That will break that it's not right. That it's not going empty space through and through. Okay, now let's continue to the Mishnah on Yutet on the base 19b1. So we started saying yesterday, Osa Sukkato Kimin Srif. If somebody made his sukkah like a srif, and when I say srif, we said it's a teepee, right? Is that the right word for it? So if you make it like a teepee where you don't recognize, Aaron, you got it? 19b, 19b1. There's a Mishnah, 2 lines from the top of the page. Osis Sukkoto, 3 lines from the top. Osis Sukkoto Kimin Srif. You made it like a srif. Also, so the srif, it's hard to, you don't really see it's hard to where the walls and what's the wall and what's the roof. So if you make the sukkah like a srif, some hotel, or you went ahead and you leaned the top of the reeds, like the reeds are kosher schach, right? The reeds are kosher schach. It's as long as you detach it from the ground, you put it on top of your sukkah, it's good. But here, if you look at picture number 5 on the note on the bottom, you see these are reeds that going against the wall. You see, you have a wall on the right and you have a wall on the back, right? We need 3 walls for the sukkah. So where are the 3 walls? You got a wall to its left. To the left of the reeds, you got a wall, right, Max? Front of the reeds, you got a wall, and the reeds itself form a wall. So let's say that's a 10 tfachim. There's a height of reeds that go 10 tfachim, right? That's the height that you need for a wall. So if you have, if you place the reeds against the wall, now tell me, where is the roof and what's the roof and what's the wall? You don't really see a roof. It's on the whole thing. This wall is like, usually when you have a roof, you have something standing and then you have something that's going across. But here you have, the whole thing is on a slope. It's on a slant. So is that called a sukkah? Is that called a tent? A temporary hut? How do we look at such a structure? Is that something that, does it bother us that you can't recognize where is the roof and where is the walls, or it doesn't bother us? It's a sukkah. It's still a kosher sukkah. You got three sides. You got, if you want to identify that as a wall or not, how do you identify it? So that's the question of the Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer posel. Rabbi Eliezer says it's invalid. You cannot use this as a sukkah. And you see the halacha, there's an aleph next to the word posel. See the word posel in the Mishnah? The aleph takes you to the top right corner of the eye of the law. See the top right corner? Ein mishpat ner mitzvah. Where it identifies aleph, it says aleph bet, Maimon, that's the Rambam, Perek Dalet Milchos Sukkah Halacha Zayin Smag. It's one of the sefer on mitzvot, which is Asay Mem Gimel, the 43rd Asay. He discusses this, and Tur Shulchan Aruch Orach Chaim Sim Tishra Shlamed Amen Aleph Tefyud. We're there. This is before any computers. He did his homework, and he told you where you can find this law. He'll tell you where you find the Rambam, and the Smag, and the Shulchan Aruch. He did the homework for you. So that's the halacha, like Rabbi Eliezer, that it's pasul, that you can't sit in such a sukkah, this TP sukkah, or this sukkah that's made where you can't identify what's a roof, what's not a roof. That's not called a sukkah. You need to have, you have to be able to see where every sukkah has to be considered an ohel, a tent. And if it's not, if you can't call this, if you can't identify this structure as a tent, it's not kosher for a sukkah. That's what he said. And the question here is this called a tent or not a tent? You have to identify the roof. At the end of the day, there's a cover, there's some sort of covering here, right? It is serving as some sort of shelter, right? You go underneath, you go inside. It's a shelter, but maybe it's still not called a tent. Maybe it's called some sort of other thing. And the Chachamim in the Mishnah says, no problem. Machshirim, they say a tent that's on a slant is also called a tent. The tent doesn't have to be the conventional way of a tent. And that's the Chachamim. Now, if you note, if the halacha falls Rabbi Eliezer, isn't that not a little strange? Usually the halacha will follow the Chachamim. That's usually the majority opinion. So we're going to see in the Gemara that there's a switch in exactly what the text of the Mishnah, who said who. Some have a different text that really the Chachamim were the ones that said that it was invalid. Rabbi Eliezer was the one who said it is valid. So that could explain why the halacha follows Rabbi Eliezer, because this reading of the Mishnah that has Rabbi Eliezer as the one that says invalid is not the majority text. Many have the text that it was the Chachamim that say it was invalid, and Rabbi Eliezer said it's valid. So let's see the Gemara. Tana, we learned in a Braita. Mo de Rabbi Eliezer, Adam, you sent out that we're on yet? I forgot to remind you, forgive me. Well, thank you for all the times you do send out. Tana, we learned in a Braita. Mo de Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer admits, Rabbi Eliezer who says that it's invalid if you can't recognize the roof, you can't identify what's the roof and what's the wall. He says, if you raise the structure from the ground a tefach, and therefore you have a straight tefach that's going up, like look in the note 8, like Adam says, 8, you raised it a tefach, and then it started, and then the structure started, moving, sloping. So if you raised it, good morning, Mr. Silverman. If you raised it a tefach, so once you have a tefach wall, and there's a discussion in the commentaries, does that tefach have to actually be an actual tefach of sealed space, like a structure of a tefach, material of a tefach, or it can even be an empty space, like in the picture that they have. It's on pegs, the empty space. It's not filled in on the bottom with you put it on some sort of something that's a solid thing that goes for a few inches, 3 to 4 inches high. But once you have that raising, we look at that like that's a wall. You created a wall of a tefach. Once you have a wall, once you can identify something as a wall over here, so therefore, then you could look at the rest as a roof on top of the wall, going on top of the wall. So that's that's Rabbi Eliezer would admit in such a situation that if you, Mr. Silverman, we're on 19b1, if you raised it a tefach, or shefliga minakota tefach, or if you moved it away from the wall a tefach. If you look at picture, so picture number 8 had the case where it was raised a tefach. Both the case of the tipi that was raised a tefach, and both the case of the reeds that were against the wall. If you look at that bottom platform, you see that bottom platform was raised a tefach, the bottom of the reeds. Case 2 is if you moved it away from the wall. That would be the case of the reeds that were against the wall, right? So what happened? You have this is the wall. Make believe this is a wall, and I had the reeds against the wall like this. And if the reeds are against the wall like this, so there's no roof because it's sloping, it's slanted. But what about if I moved the reeds away, and I had, let's say, I placed it against, there was some thing sticking out of the wall, and I placed the reeds to lean on those pegs. But once those pegs are again outside the wall, I could say that space between the pegs is as if it is sealed. That tefach, meaning, because the top of those, here's the reeds and here's the wall. So here's the wall and here's the reeds. So if the reeds come within a tefach of the wall, what do we say? Lavud. We said it's as if it's closed. So if it's closed, how is it closed? It's closed this way. It's closed horizontally. So if it's closed horizontally, therefore we got a roof. We have a halachic roof. It's not, so once we see this seal, so now we got a roof. We got a roof. This is considered a wall. So then we're good. So if we have the reeds, which is against the wall, here's the wall, here are the reeds. If I move it away a little bit, now I got from here to here, I got it, and I moved it away a tefach. And the minimum size of something to be a roof has to be the size of a tefach. If you have something going horizontally, a tefach, that goes ahead and creates a roof, and now we got a roof, and we got sides, so we're good. We got it. Now we have a tent because you could identify the roof. If you can't identify what's the roof and what's the walls, it's not a tent. It's not an ohel. That tefach creates, that's the roof. Right, exactly. It doesn't have schach on it. But we look at it as if it is schach because we say because the reeds are kosher schach. So the kosher schach, we look at it as if that kosher schach extended to the wall because we say it closes, right? If it's less than 3 tvachim, we say it's as if it's sealed. So if I have a space between, here's a wall, and I have a space less than 3 tvachim space from the, and the reeds are serving as the wall and is serving as the roof, as the schach. Right. The Pia Tikra was when we said the edge would come down. Here we're saying that it comes across, and right. We have that's another rule of that the wall turns. Here we're saying that this itself, this creates a roof, and now we have, and you have to say, and this area is 7 tfachim by 7 tfachim, right? So you have, so the size of this, when I'm sitting, I have to be sitting under. So it's true that this is called a roof, this is called a wall, but we're also going to consider this contraption that I'm in schach. I am covered by, because I am sitting in this structure, even though we're going to call this created the roof, but we're also going to use this wall as if I am sitting in a sukkah. I am under the schach. It's an interesting point, because if it's what is it? If it's how can a wall be a schach, right? That's the, but in a certain sense, it's not. It's also serving. It's not just a wall. It's serving as a cover. So maybe it's serving as a cover as well. So even though the actual roof is only one tefach that you could see, meaning once you could call this a roof, so we will say that you're under a structure. But it's a good point that you're asking, that if this is a roof, so how am I in a, but what is this? What do you identify? Yes, Max.
I'm sorry, but essentially this the stuff that's coming from the ground or off the ground is also considered the root. Isn't there a requirement to be at least 10 something?
But I have a height. I got a height. So I got a height on this of 10 tefachim. There's a height on this wall, on this slanty. Let's make believe this is very goes very high up, right? It's a very big slant. So I got the 10 tefachim. See again the case of when it's raised the tefach, that tefach that raised makes it that's a wall. The tefach, if it's raised, there's two cases. There's a case when it's away from the wall, right? When the reeds, here's the wall, and the reeds go away from the wall, so that space away from the wall creates a tefach of a roof. Then there's a different case when the bottom of the ground is raised. The reeds are not directly going on the ground on a slope. There's some sort of let's say, if you look at the picture number 8 on the right side, there's some sort of, on the bottom, you put something on the bottom running across. So that's a wall. That's not a roof. Okay? So now, like Simon is pointing out, and you're pointing out, you have an interesting phenomenon. Well, if we, let's say in this case, when we move the reeds away from the wall, so now we consider this empty space connected, like a roof. So now we have a roof, and now we have walls. We could identify a roof, and that's good enough. But even now, so the question Simon's asking, but at the end of the day, don't you need a roof of, over an area of 7 tefachim by 7 tefachim? So how do you use this side, this as schach, if this is not a roof? The only thing that's the roof is this one tefach. That's what's bothering. Yes. You got the right contract. Yes. Yes, yeah. So that's the question. So Aaron is saying, could you bend the wall to be the roof? So do you say now that you have this roof, will we look at the whole thing, this other thing, but also you need walls? So, or the point of the or this opinion of the Gemara is, as long as you could call this a tent, now that you have a roof, so this is called a tent, an ohel, and on Sukkot I have to be sitting in an ohel and a tent, and he holds this is good enough. Maybe he holds that it serves as walls, and it serves as a roof. Maybe it holds. If I'm sitting in such a structure, right? I am sitting in the structure. Now, maybe it could be dual. Maybe this item, here's my wall, and here's my reeds. It's serving as a wall, right? It's serving as walls, but it's also here. It's serving as a wall. It's enclosing, but it's also serving maybe as my schach. So maybe it can have a dual purpose, Simon. So maybe that could be an explanation of why when you have it away from the wall of tefach,
Is there a requirement that the stock be parallel to the ground?
is there a requirement that the be parallel to the ground?
If you're on a slope surface, like on a hillside, and you set up your few walls that are different, they each have a different height, but they make it such that the stock is like is horizontal, but it's not parallel to where the
Okay, so we have to see the Gemara is going to talk about different type of structures, so we have to analyze that. Okay, it's time for davening, but we'll want to wish everyone a great day. If you look at note number 9 in the art scroll, it says the horizontal. You see in the middle, second paragraph, note number 9. The horizontal tefach wide gap is adequate, though it does not have the dimensions of schach, 7 by 7. It's not comprised. As long as the sukkah appears to have a roof, a portion of the sloping surface, which is comprised of material, can be combined with the gap to avoid the schach. Okay, have a great day, everybody. Sylvan, thank you for joining. You too.